Kindly silence all mobile devices as the program is about to begin. Please welcome to the stage Scooby Leposki, independent artist.
Hello, everyone. My name is Scooby Leposki. I'm a sound designer and artist based here in Cambridge. What we've just been listening to is the electrical activity of this beautiful garden in this middle section on the auditorium. Today's a bit of a special occasion. You've kind of caught me indoors, as I'm usually out in the wild at remote locations, sonifying and recording different places that are now have become kind of vectors of various anthropogenic forces like climate change, geopolitical conflict, and resource extraction. So I often get asked, how does one start making music with plants and trees? And as a sound designer, you're always looking for new tools and techniques to further the sonic language. And I happened upon biodata sonification around 8 years ago and thought it would be a useful tool in the studio if I kind of had a writer's block. Maybe I could hook up to my houseplants and they could come up with some melodies better than me. And it wasn't until I really left the studio and kind of ventured out and started connecting to plants and trees that really I had no control or influence over. And I kind of like plants as a living reflection of the conditions and circumstances where they lived and existed. So I've worked with filmmakers and various designers and creatives kind of telling their story. And it wasn't until leaving the studio that I realized that maybe the story could kind of tell itself, especially if I kind of stepped out of the way, kind of minimized the me part of it, and let nature kind of speak for itself in many ways. So I'd like to share a couple ongoing projects with you today. Hidden Life Radio is a public art project that operates essentially like an online radio station that live streams the sonified biodata of the tree canopies in different locations. I first started in Cambridge with 3 different trees around the city. It's moving to different locations each year. So this is one of the biodata kits that I designed and built. It's solar powered, it's autonomous. It reads the electrical activity, beams the data to a computer that translates it into music and then live streams it for you to hear. One of my favorite aspects of Hidden Life Radio is it kind of forces the listener to exist on tree time, because trees are such large, like dynamic living systems that the changes happen, sometimes it takes days or maybe even weeks to really hear these changes. So if the listener sticks with it and listens to the live stream, they'll start noticing these different changes. And there's always like a weather widget on the site, so you kind of can see what the conditions are and make those relations between what the tree is experiencing with the weather and the climate and the conditions and then what you're hearing. And it all happens in real time. So it's a mobile formatted website. The idea is that maybe you would actually be in that location where the tree is and kind of compare what you're experiencing to what you're hearing through the live stream. The second project is an ongoing site-specific music project with LA-based guitarist Charles Copley. Charlie and I hike into different locations, often remote, with all of our gear and kind of set up a temporary studio, really trying to capture the essence of these places. So this is us out in Malibu, and we do many detailed field recordings, and then we're sonifying the plant activity. And Charlie is listening in real time to what the plants are creating and improvising. And our hopes is that it kind of is a way to sort of further the singer-songwriter tradition, that there's always been a reverence for nature, and we're, hopes that maybe it's a more of a direct connection that inspires, Charlie's songwriting. So we've been to many locations, many in California, and a lot of these locations now are part of these vectors of change. Malibu now is really like a site of like rampant poaching of native plants due to certain trends. Like white sage is really getting poached a lot. And we've been out in Joshua Tree National Park, where an ongoing drought is really threatening the existence of a lot of those iconic desert plants. And we most recently traveled to the Middle East to record at 2 oases, one in the West Bank and one on the Israeli side. And we got very different results from both locations. And we're currently mixing all these locations in the studio for further release later this year for you all to hear. I want to thank Solve at MIT for having me here and to let me share my story with you all. I hope that you will tune into the trees and listen to the palm reading project as well. Thank you. Oh, here's the clicker.
And now, please welcome Hala Hanna, Executive Director, MIT Solve.
Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of Solve at MIT. This was Scooby and Mother Nature at the turntables. I think my shoulders finally relaxed with all the plants here. How are you all feeling? Yeah? Zen? Should we talk about climate change? Seriously, too often we talk about climate change through the apocalyptic lens of too little, too late. Understandably, it's a million degrees out here, and the weather used to be the thing of small talks, and now it's, front page. But we have made progress. We've lowered our estimate of temperature increases in the long run. The technologies that will make the biggest difference are becoming the cheapest, and innovation abounds. I find, that in a word of eco-anxiety, our solvers are true beacons of hope. Take Solver, Amazon Gatherers for the Future. They help communities in Colombia find and harvest acai as a delicious alternative to deforestation. When they became a solver, they were a prototype phase, and today they've tripled their acai harvest, and they've protected 50,000 acres of land. And I actually this is a good moment to recognize all indigenous communities around the world who have been and are the most effective guardians and stewards of our natural ecosystems. On the aggregate, our solvers are contributing a net reduction of over 2 million metric tons of CO2. And we want to do a lot more. This work, though, cannot scale without the support and partnership of organizations who believe in early-stage innovation. One of such long-time champion is General Motors. So I'm excited to announce today the General Motor Prize for solutions that help create smart, safe, and sustainable communities around the world. There will be up to $150,000 awarded across up to 6 solver teams for the 2024 Global Challenges on Learning, Climate, and Indigenous Communities Fellowship. The prize winners will be announced at Solve Challenge Finals in September and during Climate Week. So, for the next hour, how about we focus on abundance, on how we get to our destination rather than whether we're going to get there. Let's hold on to our Scooby Zen and talk climate.
And now, please welcome Hank Rogers, founder, Blue Planet Alliance, and moderator, Julia Kumari Dropkin, founder and CEO, I See Change.
I think I'm going to take this side.
Thank you. You want me on here?
Oh, either way.
I gotcha. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much. All right. Well, Hank, I'm so excited to talk to you. A lot of people know you as the tenacious entrepreneur who brought Tetris from Russia to the rest of the world. And we're going to be mostly talking about climate change, but I got to say, my 8-year-old son, Rowan, watched the movie last week, and he had to ask, was it really that intense?
It was really that intense in a different way. In other words, the movie made it into action, 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 but actually it was intrigue, intrigue, intrigue.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of knew that the KGB was involved. I knew that I was breaking the law in the Soviet Union, and there were such things called gulags. But I didn't know how big of trouble I could be getting into, and so I went for it anyway.
Well, good for you, and that's what it takes to be a great entrepreneur. So, what parallels do you see with that moment, with the advent of personal computing and gaming, and this moment right now when it comes to the early days of climate tech and solutions? What advice do you have for all of the climate solutions makers and tech entrepreneurs in the audience today to seize this moment?
It's funny, but I was in Korea, and the politician asked me, so what should I do? What should we do? And I said, you know what, just tell your children the truth about climate change and then ask them what to do. Because they have no political agenda, they don't care about money. They understand that it's their future that's at stake. It's very simple. So the advice is stick to your guns. This is the biggest change that we're going to have to go through, and we are totally going to go through this.
Yeah, there's no going back. I certainly have chills thinking about it, to be honest. Well, you helped make Hawaii net negative clean energy, 100% commitments. And frankly, you were a huge inspiration to people like us in New Orleans post-Katrina, where our entire town had been destroyed, and we looked at Hawaii and said, oh my gosh, this is possible. Can you tell me how that made that happen, and specifically, how you got utility leadership to buy into this vision?
Okay, so first of all, when we first came up with the idea, we talked to the utility, we talked to the governor, we talked to whoever would listen. And they all, to the last person, said, what are you talking about? We make electricity by burning oil, $2 billion a year, and coal, $1 billion a year. And this is how we make electricity. Our job is to make it 24/7. And I said, wow, we have a tough battle ahead of us. But how do you get the politicians to be on your side? The answer is you have to get the people on your side. And how do you get the people on your side? You get the children on your side. So we had elementary school children go door to door and exchange 300,000 light bulbs. In so doing, having an explanation, a conversation between a child and an adult about saving energy, saving money, and fixing the climate. So the children push the adults push the politicians, and finally we have a mandate of 100% renewable energy in Hawaii. 100% by 2045. We were the first state to do so. Yeah. And since then, 13 other states have copied us. But just because you have a mandate that says you have to do it, doesn't mean that you're going to. So we changed the business model of the utility so they make more money by switching to renewables. They used to make 10% on the price of oil. What a dumb business model, 10% on the price of oil, seriously? Today, so oil cost them 25 cents per kilowatt hour, and wind and solar cost them 8 cents. Add storage, it's up to 12 cents. So we say, okay, instead of 2.5 cents, you make 3 cents. The ratepayers pay less money, the utility makes more money. Win, win, win. And this can be replicated everywhere in the world.
Well, is that what you look for a little bit when it comes to the Blue Planet Alliance? And specifically as it relates to Hawaii and other island nations? Like, how do you scale that across?
Right. So
Hawaii is sort of a success story. We're at 36% renewable energy today. And it's moving across the US. I mean, California copied us 2 years later. So that's like the world's sixth biggest economy. And so it's moving okay, but the US is only 4 point something% of the people in the world. And so in order to solve climate change, we have to get everybody else on board. So what we're doing is we're doing what we did in the US, starting with Hawaii, in the rest of the world, starting with island countries. So we just finished our second cohort. So now we've brought 18 island countries to Hawaii to show them what we did in Hawaii. I mean, the governor of the time speaks, the head of the utility, all the renewable energy providers, they all speak. So then they answer all the questions, because the islands, they just have no idea. And when I say we bring somebody from the island, we bring someone from the government, someone from the utility, someone from the regulatory agency, like the Public Utilities Commission, and somebody from the community, like an activist. So 4 people from each island country. And first of all, we teach them how we did it in Hawaii. And second, we teach them how to work together. Because in general, these people are working in silos. They never get to talk to each other. But in Hawaii, they're away from their country, and they all go back energized.
Well, that model of innovation and collaboration is amazing when you have 4 units to work with. But how do you scale that? So for example, my company, IC Change, we are a technology company that focuses on community priorities when it comes to all of these structural changes that we're dealing with at a base level. How do you scale that cooperation with your companies and kind of your approach? Being able to do this at scale, to deliver infrastructure at scale and have community priorities be center. And often community priorities and our climate priorities may not always align.
So our methodology is we create willpower. That's what we do. We create willpower, and we've created the willpower in Hawaii. If you go to Hawaii today and you ask the people what's going to happen with energy, they all tell you, oh yeah, we're going to go 100% renewable energy. And look, 20 years ago it was like, oh, there's no way we're going to get off oil. And so after you create that willpower, we watched it happen blossom in Hawaii, and then that willpower went from Hawaii to California. And so we're expecting to do is to do the same thing with island countries, and then move that willpower from the island countries to countries. My target isn't just island countries, but I'd like to flip like Okinawa, Hainan, Jeju Island, Bali, so that a country can see an island inside of their own country undergoing the change, and then they'll say, oh my gosh, let's do this province, and let them compete. At the end of the day, it can be done. We have the money, we have the technology. All we need is the willpower.
Can you give me an example of a technology that you feel can scale through this system that this architecture that you've envisioned? Give me a success story.
So if you look at Kauai, it's one of our islands. You would think, oh, it's the rainiest island in the world, and you've heard that. So why don't we do hydro? But actually, they're doing it with solar. So today, they're at 70% renewable energy, all basically 80-90% solar. So all those countries that are in the equatorial belt, solar is like, I don't know, God-given energy source, if you will. So solar, and a lot of places have wind. So Hawaii is a combination of wind and solar. We're the southernmost state, so we have the best solar in the country. We have trade winds, so 95% of the time the wind is blowing very strong from one direction. And then we have geothermal. And I think geothermal is the one source of energy which is, I would say, virtually untapped. And you could see it in Hawaii. A tiny percent, 30 megawatts out of like 2,000 megawatts is geothermal in Hawaii. When we are sitting on top of a hotspot, the Earth has a molten core. We are not going to run out of that energy source anytime soon. All we need to do is learn how to drill down to it. And guess what? The oil business has taught us how to drill. We know how to drill.
I'm aware.
Drill, baby, drill, whatever. And you send down water, you get back steam.
Yeah.
This is like 200-year-old technology. That's how you make electricity. And for places that don't have geothermal, then there are places that have geothermal, that have excess, use that excess energy to make hydrogen and then ship the hydrogen to places that don't have it.
We're talking about, enormous infrastructure opportunities, but business models that need to move, first of its kind projects and solutions. And there are solvers, of course, here in the room who are working on solutions that they're seeing and, problems that they've seen in their community, identifying them, solving them. And of course, our supporters in the room as well. What advice do you have for the solvers in the room to scale their solutions in partnership with their supporters or people like you?
Well, I would say, first of all, before you try to invent something new, look at what has already been done and scale that. So, for example, I went to Iceland to see their geothermal solution. And in Iceland, geothermal is about 25% of the energy solution. But I was just sitting at a table just now talking to a young man from Kenya, and they're like 90-something% geothermal.
That's right.
Today. Geothermal. So I don't understand what the problem is. Yes, it's nice to invent new solutions, but I kind of feel like we're in some kind of a war, and we need to have a war footing. We need to mobilize the way you would mobilize, for World War II. I'm told I'm not supposed to use this metaphor, but I'm using it anyway. We went from biplanes to jet planes. We invented radar, sonar, rockets, cruise missiles, and the atom bomb in 5 years using 1940s technology. This is 2024. There's nothing we can't do at this point in time. So
I agree with that. Actually, it was a climate science test who worked for the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and 15 years ago, and she was furious that we weren't treating this like it was the crisis of World War II. So if that's the case, then what do we need to do to catalyze that level of attention and investment?
I hate to say this, but I think young people need to get involved. You've seen recently when young people get pissed off, then everybody starts listening, and it's their future that's at stake. I've talked to plenty of old people, like people my age, and their answer is, well, I'm not going to be around when it gets really bad. I say, you selfish SOB, Don't you have children? What about?
Yeah, we can clap to that. Come on. Yeah.
Don't you have children or grandchildren, or what about them? You don't actually care about them? Nonsense. You do, and it's up to you to do something about it, or your legacy will be that you did nothing. When you stood by, you could have done something. You did nothing. I want everybody to do something.
We're a lot of us who are doing something. So I thank you, and I thank you.
I have one last message here. So people ask me if I have hope, and I say, no, I do not have hope. I have determination. Because hope isn't going to save us. Nobody's going to come in and invent something that is going to be fix everything. No, it's up to us. We're the ones who consume the fossil fuel that's causing climate change. We're the ones who have to stop.
Well, thank you for your determination. And thank all the solvers for theirs. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Sarah Beery, Assistant Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, MIT.
Hello, everyone. Like was just said, my name is Sarah Beery. I'm an assistant professor here in the AI and decision-making department. But my research and my group's research really tries to think about one of what I'm sure all of us are aware is a huge ongoing challenge, which is global biodiversity loss. So we're currently in what's being deemed the 6th mass extinction of biodiversity. We are losing species at a faster rate today than we were during the last extinction of the dinosaurs. And of course, this is related to anthropogenic change, to the sort of spread of development globally. It's also related to climate change. But the thing is, there's so much we actually don't know about why this is happening, about which species it's affecting the most, and about how we need to think about stability and regeneration for biodiversity, looking to the future, looking to those next generations. So today I'm going to be talking about mechanisms that me and my researchers in my group have been developing to try to enable novel scientific discovery using multimodal AI systems. So, like I said, biodiversity is in catastrophic decline. But the important thing is we're not just losing species, we're actually losing populations. We currently have estimated by the World Wildlife Fund about 70% less wildlife alive on Earth than we did in 1970. That's a huge number. And though that biodiversity, this sort of just existence of living wildlife on Earth, is intrinsically tied to a bunch of things that are of social importance as well. Things like climate change. Biodiversity actually impacts climate change too, in the other direction. Biodiversity is one of the big factors in what's called bioturbation that takes forest carbon, which is on a life cycle of about 100 years, and transmits it into soil carbon, which is a life cycle of closer to 1,000 years. So when we're thinking about carbon emissions, we really need these mechanisms, these sort of complex ecosystems that help transmit carbon into more stable storage systems. Biodiversity is also tied to public health, particularly with the spread of zoonotic disease, things like COVID. Biodiversity is tied to food security. It turns out when you have more diverse pollinators, you have more nutrition in the food we grow. So it's beyond just needing pollinators to be able to grow food. We actually need diverse pollinators to get nutrition from our food. And biodiversity is tied to ecosystem services, things like carbon capture, things like cleaning the air that we breathe. Ecological data, people are trying to understand these things, and we're collecting data now with both increased quantity and increased diversity. We, in my group alone, work with everything from satellite imagery, low-flying aircraft and drones, on animal sensors. These are things like collars placed on elephants or seals or anything you can imagine to actually track the animals, but also collect data that we don't have, things like ocean temperature, ocean salinity, in ways that are actually intelligently collected. Huge networks of stationary sensors, things like camera traps, bioacoustic sensors, collecting information about species on the ground all over the world. And then increasingly what we call community science data. So this is, I don't know how many in this room have tried to use iNaturalist or are familiar with Merlin Bird ID. Awesome. If you haven't, I think these are really amazing platforms. They let passionate community members go out and collect scientific data of the species they see that then get identified by the community to research grade and get transmitted into the Global Biodiversity Information Facility as species occurrence records. And the funny thing about biodiversity, all of these different types of data, is it turns out none of them is giving us a direct measurement of what we care about. None of them is giving us a species or a direct sort of estimate of what we call alpha diversity, the number of unique species in a given place. They're all proxy data. They're things like pixels and images or sonar signals. And all of this needs to be then processed into scientific insight, something we can actually make a decision on. And that's where we need AI. And AI is currently used to process data for thousands of conservation organizations, thousands of scientists worldwide. We do things like detect humans, animals, and vehicles in static networks of cameras to enable state agencies, governmental agencies, to get to the point where they have good, actionable, up-to-date information to make policy decisions about, for example, wolf populations in the Idaho. But it turns out that that environmental data across all of those different data types is really not collected uniformly. We have this estimate on the left of alpha diversity worldwide, which is clearly mostly in the subequatorial tropics. If you look at where we have that species occurrence data in the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, it's almost anti-correlated. So there's clearly a huge need to go out and get information, to have these mechanisms for extracting information or collecting information in places where we maybe need it most in order to maintain that sustainability and the regeneration of biodiversity. And so looking at all of these different data types, for the rest of this talk, I'm going to focus just on iNaturalist data, just on one of these types of data, and bring up what I think is an exciting direction that helps us get more information out of the data we've already been collecting and helps us think about mechanisms to scale that data collection. So these are all images from iNaturalist. And iNaturalist has now collected over 173 million observations of species, over 460,000 species. This is actually now 95% of all of the biodiversity data that we have collected throughout history. So just enabling passionate community members to go out and be a part of this system, to be a part of understanding biodiversity, is clearly incredibly valuable. But currently, what we have in iNaturalist is an image with a species label. So for example, in this image, the iNaturalist label is plains zebra. But there is way more scientifically useful information in this image than just the presence of a single species. We can see behavior, potentially some sort of conflict behavior. We're seeing wildlife and livestock coexistence. There's a lot more here that we would love to be able to get to than what is identified by the community. And this is kind of ongoing. So for example, you could find examples of hermit crabs using plastic waste as its shells, these intersections between human waste and wildlife. Things like wildlife using man-made roads, intersections between wildlife and human infrastructure. Or even stuff like all of these other queryable systems that would let us get more information from the data that we've already collected. So the hope here is that we could actually build systems that query using multimodal AI to enable us to get at all of that diversity information in those 170 million images. So what we're trying out is we're using multimodal AI models, vision language models like CLIP, to extract embeddings. These are low-dimensional representations of these images that are semantically meaningful. And then what we can do is we can actually also extract an embedding from any text query, such as a California condor tagged with a green 26, which would enable us to track an individual condor in those sightings over time. Then what we can do is we can just find a similarity score across these representations of both images and that text query, and then we can re-rank all of those images, all 170 million images, to find the ones that are closest to that interesting text query. And then what this gives us is a mechanism to make it easy for an ecologist, for a scientist, for a community member, for a local area manager to get to useful information to ask new questions from the data we have. So this is great, but it turns out that these existing models are insufficient to do this for scientific data as is. Turns out there are a lot of different types of low precision errors. So here it's doing a good job of finding green tags on a condor, but they're not the correct number. Or for scientifically nuanced information like allo-feeding behavior, you're not getting relevant examples. So what we're looking at now is developing re-ranking mechanisms using now more intense, more computationally expensive vision language paired models to try to get better results towards the top of that retrieval system. And so now what this looks like is you re-rank maybe the 2,000 closest matches from CLIP using something like an LVLM, and we get much more accurate results. And so here, what you can see is that this re-ranking, it makes this even better. It makes this work better for scientists. And LVLM is expensive, right? If we wanted to run a single query using LVLM over all 170 million images, it would take about 57 days. But by kind of pairing the efficiency of a standard CLIP model with the accuracy of these LVLM models, we can find a sweet spot where you can get a return from 170 million images that's accurate in about 2 minutes. And of course, we're working on trying to make this more efficient. And what we've been doing now is we're working directly with ecologists to try to design these interactive multimodal systems that make this process really easy for them to use. So we've deployed this with the team at iNaturalist, pretty soon it's going to be going out actually for public use, which I'm very excited about. But we're also working with ecologists across many different areas, Ocean Vision AI, for example, to try to translate these into operational systems that are letting us ask and answer these new open-ended questions from data that we've already collected, which I think is very exciting. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, or if you're interested, or if you're working with biodiversity data and you'd like to think about how AI could play a role, please reach out. And I'd also like to thank the other researchers who helped work on this project.
Please welcome Rania Khalaf, Chief Information and Data Officer, INARA. Ritu Raman, Assistant Professor of Mechanical Engineering, MIT. And moderator Alexander Dale, Director of Global Challenges, MIT Solve.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the stage. It's wonderful to be able to talk with both of you. You are both here, and you're both doing really interesting pieces with biotech. And so I want to start our conversation off with a little bit of what you're doing with some of these physical materials. So, Rania, starting with you, you come from an AI background, but you're now using it to make better seeds. Can you tell us a little bit about what seeds can mean for climate and how AI helps us make better ones?
Sure. Hi. If you think about the problems of our time now, I really think we're looking at food, climate, and health, the three, and food plays a really central role. So if you think about greenhouse gas emissions, food and agriculture account for about 24%. And if you look at the rate at which the population of the world is growing, we just don't have enough land and water to grow the food that we need to feed everybody. So at Inari, we are using multiplex gene editing and AI to figure out where and how we can edit corn, soy, and wheat so that they create more food and use less water and resources.
Perfect. And so you've got both the AI and the CRISPR piece. You've got all the different trends here in Kendall Square all blended together. Ritu, at MIT, you're working with adaptive living tissues, I think is the way. Can you tell us what those are and give us a specific example of what that might look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a mechanical engineer by training, so generally when we think of mechanical engineers, we say, okay, you know, they're building machines, trains, planes, that sort of thing. But usually they're building with things like metals and ceramics and polymers. And what we're trying to do is figure out a way that we can start building with living tissues like cells and organs because they can sense and adapt to their surroundings in real time. So a specific example of something we're working on is developing actuators, so anything that generates force and produces motion, which a lot of machines and robots need. We use living muscle cells to make actuators. And the nice thing about them is that they're very energy efficient. They use sugar as an energy source. They can exercise and get stronger. They can heal from damage.
That's super cool. Give us an application that you're focused on right now.
Yeah, so a lot of our work kind of splits between robotics and medicine. So on the robotic side, we make robots that swim, walk, pump, grip, using muscle to do that and show that they can adapt to their environments. And then because we're making tissues, often with like mouse or human cells, which are really good models of our own bodies, we can use them to understand more about our own response to exercise or our response to different sorts of diseases that might limit our mobility. So we have applications in both those spaces.
Really, really neat. Both of you are doing these very technical pieces with very tricky systems. You're generating some information on how to do this. You're building some complicated physical systems. I want to talk a little bit about how we move those from a lab scale or an information scale to a set of physical objects, and then we should talk about how we get it to scale. So, Rania, when you want to take this set of information, use CRISPR to make better seeds, what are some of the limitations on getting those seeds to a bunch of farmers or a bunch of different places, or one of the frustrations in trying to develop them?
I think you hit on a very interesting point, which is this combination of the bits and bytes, so the computational world and its intersection with the biological world. And these things go at different rates and speeds. So I come from a pure tech background, and there, you're delivering code multiple times a day, continuous delivery. And at Inari, when I joined, you realize these plants, they take several weeks to grow. It takes 5 to 10 years to make a product because you have to, it's great if you make one seed, but if you need to get to farmer scale, you need millions of seeds. And we have to really think about that interplay and making decisions early enough so that you can collect the data you need when the plant is still alive before it's harvested, and time all these cycles, as well as be able to translate the biological problem into a computational one, which is not obvious all the time, and probably, Ritu, you see a lot of that as well, right?
Do you want to talk about some of the biological problems and translating those back to computational problems in other spaces there too?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, our bodies are very, very complicated computers, right? So you have a motor control system in your head that's then distributed throughout your spinal cord and is telling you, reach over there and pick something up is a very computationally difficult problem. So figuring out how to map that circuitry and then build it up from scratch is incredibly technically challenging and requires you to understand the architecture first. And so there's a lot of back and forth that happens.
Great. So you have these different machines. You're going to put muscle cells so that my computer or my other pieces can move around and use muscles to do things. I'm going to feed them with sugar. Great. What are the steps in between getting that from your lab into the hands of some students at MIT to try it out, and then from there to people across Cambridge being able to use it?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked because I think we're both in a time but also a physical place that is really amenable to doing that sort of thing, right? Like MIT is very focused on the ethos of mens et manus, so having your hands and your mind being involved in the thing you're doing, and there's a strong maker community. So we have so in my lab, we train people for several months and usually years to be able to make muscles and use them. But we also run workshops at the biomaker space that started a couple years ago, and a new biomanufacturing space that we're starting in the next year or so, where people get hands-on experience on building with cells and using tissues with their hands.
Very cool. Rania, coming back on the same piece, you've talked about how you work with AI, now you're in this physical space. How do you see this interplay on people who want to do good things and want to use some of these AI tools? Where do you see the intersection with those, with all these different problems that you mentioned, and the ways that AI can help us solve these very physical problems?
It's been interesting. A lot of the money being pumped into AI right now is going very much into consumer tech, faster email, make me more efficient, more effective. But a lot of the talent today wants to work on more impactful problems. A lot of the people in this room probably also want to, spend their energy maybe not on having eyeballs longer on a scrolling page. So this is where thinking about how data and AI can really help, in my case, to solve these big problems. The opportunity is really massive. It takes some time and patience because we are at the intersection of disciplines, and that is never easy, right? Because you have a language barrier, there's a way of thinking barrier, so you really have to interleave these disciplines. But I'm excited to see more things like the Schwarzman College of Computing and what's happening at BU as well, where they're creating these schools that are multidisciplinary from the get-go, so you don't have to force yourself to be computing or biology, you can be computing and. Because for us, let me give you an example, the terminology is all different, so we have to spend time nearly on a lexicon, and it takes about 6 months for a AI person that's not coming from ag biotech to get proficient enough to solve real problems. So the word vector, for me, a vector, or it's like in physics, right?
It's a data structure.
It's a
set
data
of numbers,
structure,
yeah.
right? In biology, it's a biological material that you use to infect the cell, right? So it's the same word, but it means a different thing. Architecture for us is the system architecture, the database talks to a microservice, whatever. And for the agronomists, the architecture is the height of the plant, the angle of the leaf. It's just the same words, they mean a different thing. So.
do you see the same piece? Because you're obviously also sitting at the intersection of
Yes.
several different fields when you're recruiting students, when you're trying to publish, or
Always, all the time, both in recruiting and publishing. I'm glad you brought both of those up because we're housed in a mechanical engineering department, which is great. We bring people from a lot of different backgrounds, but at the end of the day, if you're making a machine that's built with living cells, you either need to know a lot of biology, well, you both need to know a lot of biology, how to work with cells, but also how to machine a system and put it together and figure out how force is going to translate into motion. And nobody comes in with both those backgrounds. You're either a biologist or a mechanical engineer, so everybody has to do a ton of work, months of work, sometimes years to get up to speed, both, verbally and also technically.
Yep.
And then when you're publishing, it's all about stakeholders, talking to different people in ways that kind of highlight what they value. Even if your system might have many different applications, when you're talking to a certain audience, you want to really focus on what they care about.
Sure. I want to pull us back to a larger geographic lens. We've talked about this amazing stuff that's happening around Kendall, lots of different ways, and around Cambridge. I'm struck always by the sci-fi author William Gibson's quote that the future is already here, but it's not equally distributed. So I want to think about what it means to take some of these knowledge pieces, whether that's how to develop other seeds or the seeds themselves, adaptive living tissues, and the availability of some of those, and think about how we bring those to other parts of the world that maybe have less capacity, less piles of labs all in the same space, and wonder about how either of you are thinking about some of those different challenges. Certainly for things like climate, we know that we are going to need good seeds everywhere in the world. And I think there's some data limitations on how we even start to produce those from an AI perspective now. Is that?
So if you think about, in the opening session, I forget the name of the speaker. She was saying health is how humans experience climate change.
Vanessa Carey, yes.
I probably butchered that, but to that effect. And for me, I think also, again, food is the other. I think it's a bit of a triangle. And what we see is a lot of the push in computation and a lot of the money and the investment has really been in consumer because there's been a lot of investment there and activity, and it's faster. But we see healthcare came fast behind. But really because a lot of the regulation, and there was a big push to normalize healthcare data, to standardize it, to share it. The companies themselves were not going to share it, right? And in food, I feel like there's a big opportunity for data standardization and data sharing, which doesn't really yet exist and needs some incentives and some investments. And yesterday we were talking with one of the solvers, Taita, about the greenhouses they're putting in Africa that have IoT and collect data, and they were thinking about, can that data be part of the assets of the farmer, or can it be part of how they pay? So thinking more creatively about how to unlock data from around the world and how to be able to unlock the access to this information. The lovely thing about AI generally is it's been a big open source community focused movement. So I'm excited to see a lot more applications of data and AI and a lot more investment really from the foundations and data all the way up to the models and their applications.
How much do you think the data exists and is poorly structured, and how much does the data not exist? If we want to do seeds for Kenya, take that example, do we have the information on crop systems to do that?
So there's a lot of data on what we think of as the right side of the equation, so on fields and so on. There's been a lot of applications trying to detect disease or fly drones over fields. It's not really standardized, but at least it more or less exists, so you can collect it reasonably fast. What's very hard for the kind of work that Inari is doing is the data on the genetics and the genome to the genotype to phenotype association. So what happens to the plant, which gene is responsible for how the plant behaves. That data is very, very sparse and is not really available openly, right? And the other part in plants that's hard is that what's called the assays. So the experiments to generate data at scale of the kind of data you need to build these models is still very early in its application. So you really need this, people are calling it lab in the loop. So you really need this interplay between the experiment that generates the data and the AI model, because the models really generate hypotheses. And if you can't test the model tells you, modify that gene to get more yield, if you don't have a way to test it quickly and you have to wait several years to grow these seeds and test them in multiple locations, it's very inefficient. So you need new kinds of ways to test earlier and know if the thing is working.
So Ritu, I want to come to you on a different side. So we're talking about physical data on that side. I want to ask about who gets to be part of some of these systems as well. I know you did a bunch of work on making STEM more accessible in different parts of the world. How do you see that connected to some of your work on adaptive living tissues and some of these other machines and trying to broaden who gets to be part of these solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the opportunity, but also problem with what we do, right, is that we are in a place of great privilege here in Kendall, and the things we do are very resource intensive, very expensive, and require a ton of infrastructure. One of the nice things I think is starting to see Kendall move past healthcare into more things like food and robotics and other things where, you know, the price point where people are willing to pay or are forced to pay are much lower. And so we're forced to be able to make things in more efficient ways at scale. And I think the first part of getting technologies more accessible is making sure we're kind of broadening the application spaces. But just, you know, there's a step beyond, can I use the technology, and then also can I make it and contribute to it and have the literacy to engage in this way. And I think part of that will be not only international, but also thinking about in rural parts of the US, making sure we have ways to make sure that people feel that they understand what's happening, they have the words to use and describe it and to challenge it in some way, and to give as many people hands-on experiences with biomaking as possible.
I love that. Are there any points of final advice as to people who are sitting at that privileged point with these very deep technical systems, whether it's computational or physical, that you would give to innovators who are trying to do this work? And coming from a more startup space without quite as much of that infrastructure in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the really nice things I think about Solve, and probably everyone who's here, is you're sort of focused on a problem and less, I think something that I really struggle to get across, at least to a lot of students at MIT, is they're focused on like degrees and milestones, right, and things that make sense of like, I will define a path and then somehow that will have positive impact. And I think for anybody else, I would say like picking a problem that's really hard and that matters to you is more important than the specific path you take to get there. So that's mostly my advice there.
Love that. Vanya?
I think I love what you said about, you know, don't be stuck to the path, but focus on the mission that you have. I think for me, it's just passions for hard problems. These hard problems, the solutions are not really known, and that's by design. They will be difficult, but the technology is only a small part of the solution, right? So even in AI, they say like the model is 10% of the work, but we see that also even if you build a full system, there's getting it to market, there's changing the hearts and minds and the ways that the people work who will use your system, and there's the ability to take it to scale. So all these things, if your area is regulated, that also has to play a factor. So to make impactful change, it's sometimes hard, but it's a long journey, so be patient.
Thank you. So yeah, technology is only a piece of the piece, but you have to be attached to the problem. Love those pieces. Thank you for the discussion on how we take these complicated systems and think about how we make them bigger. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now, in the spirit of how do we help support people who are trying to do this work, I'm pleased to welcome this, to have one of our supporters join us for another announcement.
And now, please welcome James Newell, Executive Director, GSR Foundation.
Good morning, everyone. As announced, my name is James Newell. It's super nice to see so many people I recognise. I head up the corporate social responsibility for GSR, and I also serve as the Executive Director of the GSR Foundation. GSR, the company, is a leading cryptocurrency market maker, and in 2022, it established the GSR Foundation as an independent grant maker. Our vision is a world in which no one is excluded from participating in or benefiting from the advancement of technology and its role in progress. We have a long history of working in partnership with MIT and are in our 4th year partnering with Solve. The caliber of the projects and people we meet through Solve is always incredibly high, and we look forward to getting to know all of you better. The GSR Foundation Prize supports projects using technology in an innovative way to address pressing issues in communities which have the potential to scale globally. We typically look for solutions that remove barriers to financial inclusion and that place a strong emphasis on learning. Our roots are in frontier technology, so we have a particular interest in blockchain and cryptocurrency. We'll be awarding up to $150,000 across several Solvers teams from any of Solve's 2024 global challenges. And as before, we'll be announcing our winners at the Solve Challenge Finals on September 23rd during the UN General Assembly week. So thanks so much, everyone, and good luck.
Please welcome to the stage Taita Ngedic, founder and CEO, Cenefa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Taita, and I am first the father and then CEO of Cenefa. Cenefa is an agtech company based in Nairobi, Kenya, that is securing futures for farmers in Africa. The problem that we are trying to address is anchored on a mission that we are looking to eliminate risks and improve incomes for over 1 million farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. We envision a world where African smallholder farmers generate a legacy of thriving farms for future generations. African smallholder farmers face compounding challenges of climate change: drought, soil erosion, subdivided land, inadequate supply chains. The picture you're seeing has been synonymous with Africa. They are trapped in a downward spiral of poverty, and it's not to their liking. 93% of farmers in Africa depend on rain. Imagine a scenario if it doesn't rain. The solution that we are offering is an integrated hardware and software system that quadruples yield. We provide farmers with 3 things. One is a smart greenhouse that provides a low-cost protected environment. We combine these greenhouses with farm shield sensors that monitor and automate crop management. And the data that we generate from these IoT sensors feeds into a software platform we call FarmCloud, where we analyze outcomes and we project results or give advisory services to our farmers. Our business model is that we provide smart greenhouses as cheap as possible to drive sales of our advisory subscription services. 90% of our farmers renew our annual subscription services, where we provide advisory services and inputs. Each of these greenhouses currently goes for about $1,000, and farmers generate a net income of $780. Together with our partners, we've been able to use data to drive this cost of greenhouses down by using the data that comes from the IoT to lend to farmers and allow payment plans. Our goal is to lower this cost by as low as up to $450 for a 100 square meter greenhouse. We know it works because 7 out of 8 of our farmers report an increase in income by up to 4 times. We are proud to share that 80% of our beneficiaries are women, and we've been able to save over 1.7 million liters of water by efficient irrigation driven by IoT data. Just a couple of months or a few weeks ago, Kenya was faced with one of the worst floods it has had in the last 10 years. And we asked our users, how many of you were affected by this flood? And 79% of them were not affected by it. We are on target to get to 100,000 smallholder farmers by 2025. We've already reached 17,000 farmers in Africa, and this is where we need you to join us on our mission. We are proud to have MIT at Solve at MIT support us, among other leading organizations such as Molago and Google, and many, many other more. Our ask today is that you join us on this mission to support a team that is local in Kenya, because we believe those closest to the problem understand the solution more. But we do also understand that it will take the whole world to work together, leveraging on our different strengths, because climate change is not one's responsibility, it's the responsibility of the entire world. Thank you.
And now, please welcome back Hala Hana, Executive Director, MIT Solve.
Thank you, Taita. That was great. In the last hour, we've heard from speakers who are pushing for faster and deeper mitigation while also adapting to our changing climate and being thoughtful about centering local and community needs. The truth is, we need to reinvent everything. The way we make things, go around, grow things, light things up, all of it. And if the biggest uncertainty for where we land is our own choices, then I think we have some real options, even if hard ones. I'm going to disagree with Hank on this one. He said, hope is not going to save us. I believe hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up, ready to take action, with the determination to make it, and knowing that we have all we need to make it happen. And the solvers prove it every day. So this work feels at once personal and planetal, and above all, it's a call to action. Now, I think we're going to end this session. We've covered a lot in just an hour. Imagine what we can do in 6. You can see a preview here on the website. What I want to end on is some more live sonifications from the plants that you see here in the room and with Scooby at the turntable. So please enjoy, and I'll see you out there after the break. Thank you.